I'll begin this afternoon's session with a brief introduction. Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Young, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Tuesday, March 11th, 2025, and this is the sixth session in the lecture series entitled Advances in Operational Forestry, Tree Planting, and Carbon Mitigation Research. This series is a collaborative effort coordinated between the Canadian Forest Service and the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate and host these webinars. For today's session, we are pleased to have Delphine Théberge, who will give an exciting presentation titled Forest-Based Health Practices, From Social Representations to Favorable Environmental Characteristics. To kick things off, after completing a master's degree in anthropology, Delphine worked for various organizations, including the Quebec Forest History Society, and 2 chairs in educational leadership at University Laval, one on Indigenous forestry and the other on sustainable management of private forests. She is currently a research professional at Natural Resources Canada's Laurentian Forestry Centre and is also pursuing a Ph.D. in forest science at University of Laval. Her doctoral research explores forest-based health practices. With that, I will now pass it over to Delphine.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation about forest-based health practices. Can you see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So, as she said, I'm a social science research professional at Laurentian Forestry Center. I have a master in anthropology and I'm doing my Ph.D. in forest sciences. I have funding from the Social Sciences and Humanity Research Council of Canada and from 2 Billion Tree programs. Today, I'm going to talk about my Ph.D. results. So I'm working with a multidisciplinary supervisory committee. Maud Flamand-Hubert, my director, she's an historian working as a professor at the Department of Wood and Forest Sciences at Université Laval. Hugo Asselin, my co-director, is a biologist working with First Nations. He's the director of the School of Indigenous Studies at Université du Québec en Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Solange Nadeau, my actual supervisor at NRCan, is a senior forest sociologist. Isabelle Bradette is an emergency physician and a professor at Université de Sherbrooke. She's one of the leaders of Prescrit Nature. It's the Quebec version of park prescription. I'm also working with the team of the Observatory of Urban Indigenous Realities of the Regroupement des Centres d'Amitié Autochtones du Québec. Before I'm starting, I want to ask you some questions so you can keep that in mind during my presentation, and maybe if you are willing to, during the question period, you can answer them. So have you ever found that contact with forest and nature was good for you? It's more a personal question. And another more professional question, like, could I offer more consideration to forest-based health practices if I wanted to? So just you can keep that in mind if you want to talk about it at the end. The purpose of the Regroupement des Centres d'Amitié Autochtones du Québec, I will call it RCAAQ for the rest of the presentation. It's to defend the rights and interests of Indigenous citizens in urban area, contribute to tangible solutions and public policy that promote Indigenous wellness. RCAAQ is part of the National Association of Friendship Centers of Canada. Friendship centers began at the mid-1950s. The administrative office of the RCAAQ is located in Wendake. It's close to Quebec City. They're present to support the centers in their unique needs. Not every friendship centers has the same issues or represent the same nation or communities. In 2022, the Observatory of Urban Indigenous Reality was created to meet the growing demand for indigenous research in cities. So in all this presentation, I'm talking about health, but which include well-being. It's important to know that connection to the land, it's a determinant of health in indigenous contexts because it's linked to culture and identity. Land is considered as a place of healing and with therapeutic power. And in indigenous contexts, they prefer to frequent land walked by their ancestors. In addition to indigenous communities of North America, links between health, well-being, and nature are present in many cultures. For example, the Scandinave Friluftsliv, sorry for the pronunciation, the Sumak Kaisai from Latin America, and many aspects of the Shintoism, it's Asian/Japanese religious practices. But the links between health and nature were present in many cultures before they were studied by scientists. Ulrich is often cited for his research on faster recovery after surgery when the patient can see nature through the window instead of a brick wall. Almost in the same time in Japan, the Agriculture, Forestry, and Fishery Agency creates the term Shinrin-yoku, often translate as forest bathing. And after that, many biophysical research in health was grounded in this philosophy. Biophilia hypothesis of Wilson is a sociobiologist, bring the idea that humans have innate connection to nature and living organisms. And in psychology, as attention restoration theory suggests that exposure to nature environment allow recovery from cognitive overload. Okay, more recently, some study focused on living near green spaces. It can increase life expectancy, have several positive on health effects, and in the other way, lack of access to green space increased risk of premature death. It can. Most studies have adjusted their model for socioeconomic and demographic factors that may confound the result. In this table, I show different types of research that are related health and nature frequentation. It is scientifically documented that frequenting nature is good for health. And you can see the link below if you want to have all the references. If we are just looking at the first box, we can see that it can be beneficial for mental health, reducing stress, decreased blood pressure, the restoration of the ability to focus attention, improve concentration. Few research are about regulation and stimulation of immune system, and it can be beneficial for sleep. So if you don't believe me that research are telling that, you can go on Google Scholar and write frequenting nature and health, and you will find hundreds and hundreds of scientific research about that. But most of these studies are interested by passive exposure to nature, like walking and sitting. The effect of the forest characteristic and their therapeutic potential has been little studied, but some studies suggest that rich biodiversity can have psychological benefits or that natural forest ecosystem could be more restorative. But in another way, very dense forests can increase brain activity, stress, and fatigue. Environmental preferences can play a role in wellness, but it's hard to understand how it's working. It can vary according to the psychological state and emotion. It can vary over the course of the therapy. And over the way, and in another way, the mood can change depending of the environment. Furthermore, environmental preference may be individual, but also have cultural connotation. So I tried to class all the scientific literature on this topic inside of this figure. So we can understand the link between health, well-being, and nature frequentation. We can understand it with biophysical measure like blood pressure or cortisol level. That's the middle of the circles. We can also measure it in a psychological way with psychometric questionnaire and interviews, stuff like that. But the way that we interact with nature can be influenced by our culture. For example, forests may be not restorative if we are constantly afraid. So link between health and nature are not just biophysical. Cultural issues are also important to consider. To have a better understanding of the cultural aspect, I choose to focus on social representations. It's an important part of my cultural framework for this research. Social representation, it can be a form of knowledge socially elaborated and shared with a practical aim and contributing to the construction of the reality common to a social whole. So in this project, I'm focusing on social representation of health and on forest/nature. In my research, it's important to understand that nature and health are considered as a social construct. In other words, it's a reality elaborated through the various interpretation and representation that can be made of it. Science contributes to social construction, notably by proposing representation of the subject/object of the research. For my thesis, I'm doing 3 articles. The first one is to identify and describe the different forms of forest-based health practices in Quebec. The second one, it's on the role of the representation of health in these practices and how it can be related to the healthcare system. The third one, already published, is the role of representation of the forest and to identify which environmental characteristics are more favorable to forest-based health practices. So what is a forest-based health practices? It's really easy to get lost in the vocabulary. So I have created 4 categories of practices, which are situated on a continuum from preventive to curative. A, it's a practice focus on connecting with nature. B, sport, outdoor, and adventure activities. C, indigenous practices. And D, outside professional consultation. Here in the red circle are the activity that I focused on for my data collection. I conducted 28 interviews, most of the time by walking in the forest. 28, it's a good sample for qualitative research. I did that with practitioners offering outdoors curative activities oriented in health and well-being, and with practitioners in connection category who suggest several practices focus on well-being as a preventive approach. I also did some participant observation, so I did these practices, which helped me to better understand this practice, and because they are often experiential. So most of my data are discourses. In other words, it's text, which I have processed using thematic discourse analysis with in vivo software. So practitioner is the participant of my research, and for the rest of the presentation, I will talk about them as practitioner. When I'm talking about participant, is the participant of forest-based health practices. I didn't do interview with them, but I met some during the participant observation. So just it can be confusing. These 4 categories present different kind of activities. In connection practices, you can do yoga in the forest, Shinrin-yoku, that practice came from Japan, meditation, stuff like that. Sport and adventure context practices are generally in groups with more than 1 practitioners. The beginning of this category was with teenagers with personal challenges like delinquency or dependence, but now these practices are spreading and can concern any type of group, like from kindergarten to elderly. Sea indigenous practices are very vast. It can be canoe expeditions, ceremonies with rituals such as the sweat lodge, hunting, fishing, trapping, and medicinal plant gathering, as well as cultural activities such as handicraft making, dancing, cooking traditional food, sharing story and knowledge. In this project, I focus on my partner practices, the RCAQ, like the friendship centers. The first one was a camp in the land, and the second one was the Edu Trainer program, which combines physical training, adventure on the land, and cultural activities. Professional consultation is almost the same thing as a consultation with a professional in an office, like with your psychologist or occupational therapist, except that it's outside and most of the time in an urban park. I put here some quotes to illustrate by the voice of the practitioner different common grounds. So I won't read it, but I can say that emotion and feeling of authenticity are important. A lot of practitioners said that nature awakens our emotion. It seems easier to connect with emotion in nature, and working with emotion, it's important in a therapy. The other thing, it's the link between mind and body. It's present in almost all holistic health approach. Practitioner talk about experiential approach, kinesthetics. It's like learning by doing, the awareness of the physical experience, and mindfulness. In adventure category, they talk about to be in the flow, like to be focused on what you are doing. Another common ground is the role of the metaphors, comparison, and analogy. They are used in different kinds of therapy, and they can bring a new perspective of life. Metaphor seems easy to find in nature. For example, you can see a tree with two branches, and that can represent a choice that you have to do, and it can be a good start to talk about it with your practitioners. And one of the role of the practitioner is to bring confidence between the participant and the nature, and to take care of the safety. So practitioners not no great reticence, as most as participants are volunteers. Being in the forest seems to bring more authenticity, but some participants are reluctant to reveal themselves. Furthermore, long stay in forest can be difficult, useless, and even dangerous for people going through withdrawal, children whose daily life have been destabilized, as well as people in crisis or suffering from major depression. Participants who are not used to do or do not like to be in the forest, they can have fear for injury, insect, cold, and they don't necessarily find that frequenting forest is calming or even good for their health. That brings us to a good question. So what is health? What is well-being? Defining health is a subjective question. For the practitioners I met, health is not just the absence of disease. It's also a question of autonomy despite our limitations, and above all, balance and harmony between different aspects of well-being. For practitioner, health has many dimensions, and I've grouped them into 5 categories. Physical and mental health, I think we know what is it. I won't define it. Spiritual health is everything that helps us make sense of life, of what's happened to us, and of what is mysterious or difficult to understand. Relational health is everything that affects our relationship with other human beings, with the world of living beings, and with the natural elements. Many people have spoke to me about a feeling to be connected of something greater than ourselves, which bring us back to the spiritual health. Cultural health is linked to the feeling that our culture is recognized. This aspect is especially useful in a cultural minority context as indigenous or immigrant. In an indigenous context, it means understanding that all these aspects of health are highly interrelated. Indeed, the representation of health as various interrelated aspects are not new. Many indigenous people around the world have holistic representation of health, notably with the medicine wheel, which is rooted in Pan-Americanism. According to the RCAAQ, the medicine wheel must be mobilized carefully. The teaching associated are sacred and only recognized person can share them. And medicine wheel can take many forms depending the context, the people working with it, and the local culture. Health practitioners name several inherent risks to their practice, and they mention the importance of being properly trained. They give example like physical injury, inadequate consideration of mental health issues, weak group management, cultural insecurity or cultural appropriation, charlatanism, and sectarian drift. Risk consideration is a big aspect for public health. It might be a reason why practitioners think that their representation of health are very different than the way of thinking of the healthcare systems. Practitioners have holistic vision of health, and they think that healthcare system just focus on absence of disease. A big issue is between thinking forest as a place to heal versus a risky place. So that brings us to another good question. It seems simple, but it's not. What is a forest? In the dictionary of forestry, it's a relatively large vegetation assemblage of tree dominated stands. So in my data collection, I ask a practitioner question like, what's your connection with forest? Have you always frequented nature, or did this happen at a particular moment in your life? Why choose to practice in forests? What type of forest environment is ideal for your practice? So it's helped me to have a better understanding of their forest representation. So the answers was diversified. Social representation of the forest are broader than those mentioned in the dictionary of forestry. Practitioners talk about the forest as an entity in its own self. It may be to an unfamiliar, scary, dirty, and dangerous place, especially for the participants. It can be a place of attachment. It can be seen as the art of indigenous cultures, as a tool to improve health. In the article that I showed you earlier, we had a reflection about how a forest can be an entity in its own self, so that nature has agency, at the same time used as a tool to improve health. Through social representation of the forest, we try to understand the way we think the place of human in nature. Social representation of forests can be useful to have a better understanding of environmental preference and environmental characteristic favorable to forest-based health practices. In this table, we can see that the proximity can be important for all kinds of these practices. Remoteness too. It really depends on the type of the activities that they are doing. Remoteness is not really important for professional, but installations, easy easy to walk trail. Permission to go off trail, that was a challenge for many of them. Tranquility, it's a challenge too, because it's hard to find place with no motor noise. Protecting confidentiality was important for professional, especially in countryside, like small place that everybody know everybody. So you don't necessarily want to meet your mother when you are talking with your psychologist. So it can be an issue. Everybody like the presence of water, aesthetic landscape. Some boxes are empty. It's because I don't have data for that. I'm working in an inductive method, so I have created these categories after the interviews. So people, indigenous practitioner didn't talk about protecting confidentiality and the aesthetic landscape, and I don't really know why. I used to go back. I have to go back collecting data to know it. So blue space, it's important for everybody. It's also mentioned a lot in literature for a restorative place, but it can be difficult to have access. As a practitioner said, when you don't own a cottage by a lake, it's difficult. Many practitioners have challenged to have access to good place for their practices. For example, private land, a lot of private lands have no sanitary facilities. Moreover, many landowners are reluctant to let groups onto their land for fear of being sued in case of injury. On public land, the rules are not well known and sometimes hard to understand, and the cohabitation with other users can be an issue. The effect on the forest health. All practitioners are really careful about not leaving any waste. Most of them apply the leave no trace principle. What it is, in addition of the idea of leaving no waste, these principle of environmental ethics suggests, among other things, opting for a portable stove for cooking instead of starting a fire, or staying on durable and resistant surfaces like trail, bare soil, rock, sand, snow. However, the leave no trace principles are often difficult to apply. For example, in activities where fire plays an important role, or to go off trail. In indigenous context, it may be not relevant. Like a practitioner said, since human beings are part of nature, how can we leave no trace? This is a major clash between indigenous people and environmentalists. How can we teach leave no trace to indigenous people who have been excluded from their land for over 400 years? This brings us back to the question of the human place in the nature. And is it possible to move beyond the dichotomy of exploitation, often associated with the destruction of nature, versus the protection, where humans must leave no trace or not be present? I'm already in the conclusion. So in conclusion, forest-based health practices seems new, but they are rooted in many kinds of traditions. Social representation may influence the recognition of their practices. This project also raised questions about the place of human in nature, and it brings other questions like, can we imagine a day where health professionals and foresters are working together, where some budget in health department are linked with the natural resource department, or vice versa? And my favorite question, like indigenous knowledge dialogue with scientific knowledge in a transdisciplinary approach. So that's it for now. Do you want I stop? I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Delphine. That was a great presentation. Before moving on to the Q&A session, let's take a moment to fill out a post-webinar survey, and I'm gonna launch it now. So there are 2 questions in total. You may need to scroll down to see the next one. All right, Delphine, there is a question for you in the Q&A pod. Are you ready? Hi, Delphine, can you hear me? Oops, looks like we lost Delphine at this moment. Give me 1 sec. I think she's going to rejoin us shortly. Well, I'm not sure what's going on from Delphine's side, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type it in the Q&A pod, and I can send it to Delphine for her to answer them and follow up with you. Okay, so Delphine's computer is rebooting. She's trying to find a way to reach back. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Amelie. Okay, thank you, Slogan, for volunteering to try to answer some of the questions while Delphine is away. So the first question in the Q&A pod, is, did you speak to Indigenous practitioners exclusively, or were you able to speak to local First Nations in your study area? So Slogan, do you want to speak answering the questions, or do you want me, would you prefer to type down the questions? Type down the answers, sorry. Hold on 1 moment, Slogan. I'll just promote you as a panelist. Hi, Xavier. I just gave you the panelist invitation. So you can accept that, and then you should be able to unmute yourself and start answering the questions. Hi, Emily.
I'm sorry. I
Hi,
don't know what
Delphine.
happened. My computer just turned off. I don't know why.
It
Sorry.
happens.
Yeah, I
No
know.
worries. Right on time. So there
Yeah.
are two questions for you at this
Okay.
moment, if you're ready.
Yeah.
So the first question for you is, did you speak to Indigenous practitioners exclusively, or were you able to speak to local First Nations in your study area?
Yes, it was through my partnership with the Regroupement des Centres d'Amitié Autochtones. They have special practice in friendship centers, and I passed through them. They suggest me people to meet. Some of them was Indigenous and some of them was not, but they was working with Indigenous people.
Thank you, Delphine. The next question for you is, in your view, given that you mentioned that more open forests may be preferred, do you think this means that lightly managed forests may be better suited for health and well-being services compared to unmanaged wilder forests?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer. Like, if I understand, it's if the managed forests are better for health than a natural one. It's like that. We don't have the scientific answer for that. It's why we choose to focus on preferences. It may be a clue to know what can be the best. So I think we should work with two type of data, like the environmental preference, and maybe if some people, but I am not able to do it, collect that biophysics data with different kind of forest. Some research already did that, but we're not sure of the answer.
Thank you, Delphine. Well, I think though that's all the questions we have for today. Before we wrap up, I just want to quickly remind everyone that this session is being recorded and the recording will soon be available on our open access e-lecture page. All right, if there are no further questions, I would like to bring this session to a close. Thank you all for participating in our CIF electronic lectures. And once again, thank you very much to Delphine for the great presentation.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.